Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Well, blessings to all of you listeners today. My name is Jerry Teo with the National Compadres Network and the Healing Generations podcast here. We thank you for joining us today as we continue this journey of lifting up the medicine and teachings and values and dreams of our ancestors, and at the same time embracing and acknowledging the generations of wounds and struggles that they had to journey through, but also is in our present day reality. And so we bring this dialogue and these teachings and this time to you to hopefully add to your journey in a good way, so that you also can bring that to yourself, to your families and communities that way. I always begin, in the traditional way by acknowledging the Creator and the ancestors, and I'd like to invite you to do that with us today. And as you breathe into that, acknowledge your ancestors, your lineage, and wherever you come from. It's important that when we begin anything, that we do that acknowledgement of all people, of all races, of all ways, and of all our relations, even, the beauty of the land that you sit on, Tonancin Madre Tierra, that we acknowledge that land and who are the keepers, the holders of that land. And I'm on the Tongva Gabrielino land, and really want to acknowledge relatives there. But the land that you're on, and then the community that you live in, just acknowledge that community that holds that space and lives in that space as well. And of course, your family and who you are and your lineage that way. And you may come from, many different roots and different strains. Well, we invite you to bring all the grandmas in, bring them all in from all the different ways. They're all welcome here. We have a good journey, a good dialogue, good party today that way, because that's the way we do it. And we acknowledge all the teachers along the path that have, brought these lessons and even brought the creativity of being able for us to hear each other and be with each other right here on this podcast. Some genius people that have been able to, create things that allow us to even say prayers and songs and share spirits and feel each other across airwaves that way. I think, my grandma did it in her way. She would do prayers for her tias and sisters in Mexico. I said, Grandma, how's that going to work? She says, no, te preocupes, mijo, And she'd tell me days later, see, they're better now. I prayed that they get better in there. So my grandma knew the old technology, that we're prayers and spirit and sending. And so we're about combining all of those things, because we've learned that all can create the goodness. And speaking of that goodness, I really, really feel honored and privileged, happy today to invite a colleague, a friend, a compañero, on this path to justice and healing and innovation and policy and social justice and so many different avenues that my brother has been on. And, it's really pleased that he had the time and was willing to join us today. And who I'm talking about is Henry Ramos. And so, Henry, I want to just welcome you and thank you so much for joining us today and give you the opportunity to greet the listeners.
Oh, Jerry, Theo, Maestro, what a great honor it is to be with you and your informed listenership. Greetings, everyone. Henry Ramos calling in from Palm Springs, California, here in Califas, the heritage land of the Agua Caliente band of the Coya Indians. And always good to be in company with you, Jerry. Anxious to engage in the conversation and really just so grateful for the work that you do. It's as timely as it's ever been. Your spirit, your healing ways, your soothing voice, it's all of a piece, all very badly needed in these times. So anxious to exchange with you and grateful for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you, brother. I know that in this journey that you've walked, you've carried many roads and platforms and walked, many different ways. And I know right now you're a senior fellow at the Institute of Race, Power, and Political Economy. But I know that it took you a journey to get there. And we always want to begin by just acknowledging where we come from, because we recognize we wouldn't be where we're at without that journey and those people that contributed to the teachings, to the struggles, to everything, along the way. So I want to invite you to share a little bit about, who are you, brother, and where's your family, where you all come from, and that journey that brought you here.
Well, thank you so much for asking. And it's been a long and windy road, man. I don't want to take up your whole airspace here with that long story, but I'll try and condense it down to the essentials, right? So, I'm the product of Mexicanos, norteños. On my father's side, the Ramos side, were from Sonora. And on the Rodriguez side, which is my mother's side, we're from Chihuahua. So we're norteños. As I understand the story, and sadly, so much of the history has been lost, into colonialism and just the way that La Politica works here in the States. But from what I understand, both families, like so many Mexicano families, were swept up in the revolution of the early 20th century in Mexico. And they were pushed off the land and forced to head north. And they made their way through El Paso, as so many families did, both of them. And then for different reasons and in different ways, they ended up in Los Angeles, here in Califas. So my grandmother and grandfather, who were on the Ramos side, ended up coming almost directly to Los Angeles because they had relatives that were already settled in the city. And so my father was born an American citizen in 1919 and grew up during the Depression, was a World War II vet, was in the Army Air Corps, and became a small businessman and actually ended up owning some of the business entities on and around Olvera Street in downtown LA. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a bit. And on my mother's side, the Rodriguez side, they had a little bit more slow route coming through Arizona, and then to the Piscas and Califas, where they were picking fruits and vegetables in the agricultural sector. And eventually they made their way to Los Angeles, working in the hotel and restaurant industry. And my grandfather, Jesus Rodriguez, ended up with quite a vision. Strikingly, he started out on the east side of LA, like so many of our gente, but found his way in a really kind of bold way in time to the west side of the city, which is the more affluent and more exclusive side of town. He was able to work around restrictive covenants that limited Latino property ownership, and he was able to buy a restaurant, and he was able to buy a home there, and then succeeded in buying subsequent properties and ended up actually making quite a bit of money in his time, and was very devout in his Catholicism. And, my father, going back to my Ramos side, he was the product of a proud Mexicano family. His older brother, had been born in Ciudad Mexico and was raised as a norteño, as I said, in Sonora. And, basically what happened in my family, not unlike some other families, is that when World War II happened, my grandfather really told his boys, my dad and his brother, this is an American war. This is not a war for you to fight in. And I think my uncle, the older brother, was more identified with the Mexicano side, and he decided to go study medicine in Mexico. But my father was, I think, like a lot of guys of his generation, he was anxious to kind of prove his Americanismo. He was willing to enlist and go and serve in the war. And, frankly and ironically, my dad became quite a conservative person. He became a small business owner. He was like a Reagan Republican. He had grown up and gone to high school with Tom Bradley, the former mayor of the city, who we knew well in our family. But he ended up being a strong Republican and actually politically very far apart from where I situate today. So that's a more conversation than we have time for. But those are the origin stories. So I grew up, in short, Jerry, with a degree of privilege, especially as a Chicano. I grew up in that Chicano era in the 1960s and 1970s, when our community was really establishing its more progressive voice. And I had a lot of conflicts with my father because, like I said, he was on the other side of the fence and really didn't appreciate my long hair and my identification with more progressive causes. I went to, work as a volunteer for CESAR in Dolores, when they were doing the first strikes against the grape growers. And I painted a lot of murals, Chicano murals, got into art, and just, I found my way down the line and ended up having great opportunities education. I went to UC Berkeley. I went to Harvard to get degrees in political economy and law. Ended up working in New York City, living and working in Europe, and I've been on a long journey, but it all brings me back home. I feel like it's been preparation for coming home now to Califas to do the bidding that I was born to do, and that is to
Mm.
really, like you, to be a voice of reason in a time of locura,
Yeah.
to be a visionary and a person who's ready to build things in a new and different way than to just accept the common path that we've been subjected to in our journey, and to lift up a new and different Latino voice through our writing, through our art, through our political voice, and in the healing work that people like you do in the community, which I respect and admire so much.
Mm. Wow. That's interesting because I think sometimes, people, when they look at us as a people, they think we're monolithic. They think that we all think the same. We all believe the same. Our journeys are all similar, and we all come from, poverty and struggle. And, that doesn't eliminate the struggle of racism and oppression and those challenges. But each of us have our own journey, and your last name being Ramos. My mom's maiden name is Ramos, and she's from Chihuahua,
No me
so we
digas.
may be related, dude.
Yeah, somos hermanos, man.
We could be cousins. Who knows that way? I
Crazy,
think
man.
we're all related that way. But
Exactly.
I know, because my parents also became business people as well, and they had cleaners in South Central and Watts, and I know that struggle as well. But I'm wondering if you could share with us, along that journey, you ended up at Berkeley and Harvard, which are very prestigious schools. But I know the journey, had its challenges, along the way. And we always like to talk about, the blessings, of course, that have come. And what is it that you learned from your family, that you learned from your cultura, that you learned from that journey that has served you, along the way? But the other side too. What are the major challenges that you had to face, that you really had
Yeah,
to
yeah.
confront? And probably one of them was discussions with your father. In order for you to gain the spirit of who you are and do the work that you're doing.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? Well, my dad and I had very different generational experiences, and I think that explains a lot of the reason why we ended up on different sides of the political track. But, I
Mm,
speak of my dad with nothing but respect and love. He did what
mm,
he had to do in his day and his way, and that's how he felt he had to kind of present. But I had a different set of landscape in front of me, and I'm really grateful because through my dad's mother, ironically,
mm,
my grandma, my abuelita Josefina, she was the person that really kind of landed the punch on me in terms of understanding my identity as ultimately being a product of Mexico and Latinismo. And she did that through her food that she prepared, the tortillas that she would make fresh for us,
yeah, yeah,
she did it through her plants and her flowers in her garden in the back there in Venice, California, where she had a beautiful little bungalow home in the 60s. She did it by creating a space of safety in a time that was really crazy outside because my parents were in a really ugly divorce. The race riots were raging all over the United States. And in
yeah,
Watts, you knew about that because you were
yeah.
there. The Vietnam War was raging. And she kind of created that space of compassion that really helped me to stay whole in a time that otherwise could have ripped me apart. I was a very
Mm,
young boy, maybe 5, 6, 7 years old when all that started to happen. But above all, Jerry, I think what she did was she really, through her drawing and her painting, she was just a self taught folk artist. She inspired me early on to use that as a form of positive expression to cope with a lot of the turmoil that was
mm,
happening at the time. And I would sit with her for hours at a time, either in her garden or at her dining room table, and we would paint animals, we would paint flowers, but all of it, as I look back on it in retrospect, was a reflection, a mirror of our Mexicanidad. It was a
mm,
kind of an homage to the appreciation of nature that our ancestors and forebears have always brought to all things.
mm,
It was a recognition of a continuity in the line of our culture. And as I grew up and went on to do other things that may have made it seem to others that I had a smooth ride. To your point about challenge, I mean, what was ironic and interesting, exactly to your point, is that even as a very accomplished, educated, experienced professional, along my way, it was very hard for many of my white counterparts, particularly in more superior positions, to be comfortable with me
mm,
because they were threatened, I think, in some ways by my ability to defend myself in terms of logic and reason and argumentation.
mm, mm,
They were sometimes threatened because I was, frankly, more educated and accomplished and traveled than they in many cases.
mm,
But above all, I think the biggest threat was that when things came down to the politics of where we situate. And we had to declare where we stand in terms of the social, economic, and political justice issues of the times. I was very strong and unapologetic. I took it very seriously that I was in these positions not just because I was, so talented or so, special or any of those kinds of things. I was there because I had opportunities that many of our gente didn't have. And I was there to use that stage, not just to kind of be comfortable with my own successes, but to use it in service to our people coming behind me and the people that were in front of me. So I had a lot of contention and employment situations that cost me a couple of jobs because I stood on principle and I didn't just take the easy way out and just do what the boss wanted me to do because I didn't believe in it morally. And that's something that I think is a hard thing for a lot of our younger people to have to face, but that still goes on. It's still important for us to know who we are, to know where we come from, to know why we're there, and to use our platform and our voice, not just for comfort and convenience, but really for something bigger than self.
Wow.
So that's where I bumped into most of the challenge, having to kind of face the consequences of having a conscience.
Yeah.
And using my voice in those ways, and then sometimes being shown to the door because it didn't create comfort in the institution. I had to find a way to land on my feet, survive, and march forward. And every step of the way, I found a way to do that.
Wow. As you talk about your grandmother, I think I really want to lift up those relatives, that in spite of everything, gave us what they had, and without them even, I think, knowing it consciously, grounded us in something much deeper, much more powerful than all the obstacles that we would face. That you mentioned tortillas, and I miss my mother's tortillas so much, and my kids and all the grandkids, all her grandkids talk about the magic of her tortillas, the smell, the aromatherapy, the taste, the way she would make it, hearing her hands, the hearing the rhythm. I mean, all of those things that now we can recognize, get into our spirit, lodge into our spirit. And then when we're given that food that are generations old, so we're given a generational medicine that is given to us in a loving way, and with a way of acceptance that you're loved, that I give you this to feed you, and not just to feed you physically, but to feed your spirit. That your grandmother, you got to sit with her and create, to create with your grandmother.
Oh yeah, man.
What a blessing.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, to create with your grandmother as she was creating in you a foundation that you have the ability to create.
Yeah, that's the gift that never stops giving from her.
Yeah, you have that, and don't let anyone take that from you.
Yeah, no doubt. And on the other side, my mother's parents, they were very impressive people, hardworking. We Católico, committed to the church, the whole way, the whole mile. And they started with a little restaurant there on Pico Boulevard in West LA, Pico and Bundy. And there weren't a lot of Mexicanos on that side of town, trying to bring it. And they made it work, man. And, they ended up with 3 major restaurants, one near 20th Century Fox, one of the major motion picture production centers of Los Angeles, one in that Pico corridor I talked about, and one in the then new Marina Del Rey area, which was pretty exclusive at that time over on Lincoln and Washington Boulevards. And, I didn't really fully appreciate it, even though I loved it. I knew I was, special and lucky and fortunate. But with the passage of time, as you say, man, you appreciate these things in their context in a whole different way. And what they were able to do, the courage that it took for them to, negotiate and finesse the legal and the political obstacles that they faced, to be in that space, to succeed in that space, and then to realize they hired a lot of our gente, man. They created a lot of economic opportunity for our people, the suppliers, the workers. They created a whole familia, an extended family even beyond my own. And it was just such a nurturing way for me to be able to grow up and to find ultimately the bridge that I needed between this kind of privileged West Side reality that I was growing up in and my heritage, So without my forebears, my grandparents in particular, like I say, man, I might not have made it out of those really rough times. I might have just, succumbed like so many people did to the worst of what happens to people when they're broken and hurt.
Yeah, and it's going on today. I mean, the labor force that we provide, all across the world, but in all these communities is significant, and my dad owned a cleaners there in South Central LA. And so people would come to him, there not only to bring clothes to get clean, but also when they needed money because they knew he had money there. And so he'd give money out to people that needed it as supposedly a loan that so many times didn't get paid back. But I remember, since we're right around the holiday season, it reminds me that, there was some families that were coming and they were trying to ask my dad for some additional money so they could take the Red Line, which was like a trolley car that went up to downtown to the May Company store, because that's where they had the Santa Claus, right? That we didn't have Santa Claus in the barrio. You had to go up there to May Company and a lot of families couldn't make it up there. They didn't have enough money to get there, and they didn't, whatever. And I remember my father, him saying, pues, why don't we have Santa Claus here? That's whole discussion. The following year, my dad and I saw him working on this outfit. He was a tailor, and he got this outfit, and he made a Santa Claus outfit.
Imagínate. Wow.
And then he got Felipe, the presser, didn't even speak very much English, right? And nomás habla puro español, and he got Felipe, and he dressed him up.
He loaded him up in a suit and sent him off to see the kids.
And he had to teach him certain words.
Oh, my goodness.
What do you want for Christmas? What do you want for? What do you want for? You've been a good girl or a good boy.
Beautiful.
He taught him certain phrases, and then he bought a bunch of candy.
Yeah.
And the lines that lined up.
There you go. Yeah, it's the little things like that are so transformational, especially for young kids as they're in formation, right? And if you're growing up in a space where that's withheld from you, or it's not available to you, it can have a lasting impact. But on the other side of it, when it is made available to you through that kind of ingenuity, it really can be a beautiful thing that you carry with you wherever you go, And you grew up, a little bit maybe ahead of me. I remember the cable cars, the trolleys in LA, just when they were being taken out of commission in the early to mid 60s, right?
Right.
But we had Familia downtown in some of those same areas. Like I said, we had ties to Olvera Street, and it was a really kind of an interesting time in Los Angeles history, and especially in South Central. I'm sure that you had a strong affiliation with the African American community because that was a major center of gravity, for that community at that time.
Yeah, and as you're speaking about that, that was, I'm sure your experience too, but that was the rooting for me of the cross-cultural work. I lived with African American relatives. I call them relatives. They were partners, they were homies, they're grandmas that blessed me, that took care of me. Yeah, they were part of me, the whole way, and part of the reason why I'm here today. Mm-hmm. But it also brings me to that sense of struggle that many people don't realize. And I would imagine that seeing that you went to Berkeley and Harvard and had a little bit of privilege, don't recognize the true challenge and pain of being questioned, of being, of having to prove that even what you're saying, what you're thinking is valid. And the struggle that after so much that you've accomplished, so you graduate from Berkeley and from Harvard, and then that you still get questioned, I know for me has been an ongoing struggle after, 40, 50, I'm still getting questioned about whether what we bring, what I share, what we share has any validity. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about that, because I think that, a lot of our people and, people of color, and especially that are in the realm of education, of policy, of organizations, and are trying to advocate because of how the system and people still see us and the racism and oppression, we still get challenged for that. I wonder if you could talk to that a little bit and, a little bit more about your struggle with that, and then how you were able to deal with that.
Yeah, that's a very large question, but a really, really important one. And I have a lot to say about that. I hope I can condense it into something that's, digestible for your listening audience. Well, I think that it's exactly that tension that you speak to, Jerry, that has created a lot of additional incidents of mental illness in our communities and struggle. Because let's face it, when we talk about, trying to become incorporated in what we know as the mainstream culture, the mainstream economy, or the mainstream political system, I think it's hard to admit for many people, but the true reality is, although there's a lot of elasticity and there's a lot of upward mobility built into the American model, the reality is that it's very contingent. It really is incumbent on people that are outsiders, whatever their background, whatever their race, whatever they're bringing linguistically or either country of origin. It's an imposed understanding that those of us who are outsiders are the ones that have to accommodate to a kind of a standard, which is based on the white, straight, male, Christian model of what it means to be an American. And it's always been a struggle. This is nothing exactly new. I mean, when the immigrants came from Eastern Europe and from other parts of the world at the turn of the 20th century, it wasn't unlike now, where there's a lot of resistance and a lot of conflict. But I think what has kind of transpired in my evolution of thought is the recognition, and it's not unique to me, I think many of our gente have come to it even sooner than I did, that in order for us to truly find our voice, to find our true power, we have to create alternative centers of gravity. We have to create our own terms of engagement. It's not to say that we can disengage from the mainstream culture, because I think that there's a lot of reasons why it's important for us to embed, to succeed, and to thrive in that environment. But, it's not unique to us. We look at the Jewish American community in this country and others, and they have always been, I think, considered to be not fully the same as, the established crowds. And they've had to create their own alternative economy, their own alternative faith, realities, their own political power. I think African American people have been called to do the same kind of thing. And I think we are in that line of similarity in terms of having to really step into an understanding or a redefinition of what it means to be who we authentically are. And that is something that is not, I think, fully a consensus in our community. I think there's a lot of folks in our community that would disagree with that assessment. Certainly there would be people outside of our community that would be critical of it. But I think that what I'm saying is that more and more, especially as I talk to younger people coming up, I'm not saying to drop out. I'm not saying to disregard the realities of the power structure within which we all live in this country. But what I'm saying is we can't be continually looking for some person of power or some person of authority to embrace and accept us in a way that probably is never going to happen, because that sets you up for defeat right from the beginning. And the system is not set up for us to win. If you win in this culture and this economy and this political structure, and you're a person who's like us, who comes from the backgrounds that we come from, you're not doing it because anyone's helping you. You're doing it in spite of. You're doing it despite the obstacles that are laid down in front of you. And if you're Black, or if you're a woman, or you're gay, or, in any of these communities that are quote unquote outsider communities, it's the same thing. So one of the things that I think that we have to come to is an embrace of what our authentic and real power is. And I think we have to lose a lot of the inhibitions that we've created about using our power, using our voice, being, professional, respectful, humane, but unapologetic about what we are bringing to the world. Because the honest truth is, and I'll close by saying this for this part of the conversation, when people talk about the kind of the merits of American society and the attributes that we look for in people, I would argue that long ago, the mainstream, white, Christian community has shed itself of a lot of those things, even though they continue to claim it. I mean, talk about people who are hard workers. Who's more hardworking than Latino immigrants that you know of?
Yeah.
We talk about being people of faith, true faith. I mean, I'll take you to a church, whether it's Protestant or Catholic, on any Sunday, and in a Latino community, and you're going to find true believers. People that really are truly faithful. They're not just talking about it; they're really bringing it. We talk about commitment to family and community. I mean, again, I'll take you to a park on any Saturday afternoon in LA or any surrounding city that has any large consequential population of Latinos. You're going to find not only just a boatload of Latinos there, you're going to find, abuelitas and abuelitos with their children and their grandchildren, even their great-grandchildren. And when you go around in mainstream American society, it's very rare to find the generations actually spending time with each other and legitimately enjoying and embracing it, right? That's what we're bringing. So when I think about all the qualities of traditional American values, I would argue that it's people of color, and in particular, especially in places like Califas, Latino people, that are the ones that really hold that up the most. And I think that those are things that we need to embrace. We need to use that as a basis of our authenticity, our legitimacy, and our power in this nation. And we need to be a little bit more fearless and a little bit less apologetic about, how we seek to integrate on terms that are comfortable and authentic for us, as opposed to trying to fit into something that was never set up for us in the first place.
Yeah. Well, you bring into context the interconnection, between, race and culture and power and policies and the political realm, and which then impacts economy and our health and well-being, everything together. And I think that often we don't really see the interconnection of all of those things. But we saw it through the pandemic. We saw race play out into the health inequities that are based in policy, that are inequitable, that are based in a history that is, based on racism and oppression. And now it affects our individual and overall well-being. We saw it also in the international spectrum of thinking that we could create walls or whatever and keep people out. We can't. We're all interconnected. So I think what you're really lifting up is the true reality that as a society, we are interconnected. The problem is we have not been acknowledged, meaning we, the people of color, we, the indigenous people, have not been acknowledged for what we bring and have brought. Because when the general society then sees some value in it, they then take it on, right? Shift it up a little bit, change the name, call it theirs, and then want to feed it back to us like they created something, and that's the ongoing
Sadly,
issue.
so true. Too often so true.
So, tell us about a little bit about what you're doing now in that role of being a senior fellow. What is the contemporary work that you're doing now that brings all of this together, that brings your years of experience to really lift up some of the things that we've been talking about?
Yeah, and I'm very fortunate to be able to have this stage because the Institute, I think, is a jewel and a platform of some, I think, import at this moment in our history, created by my friend and colleague, Dr. Derek Hamilton, one of the leading African-American economists in our country, and really dedicated, as its title says, to address issues of race, power, and political economy, but from an alternative perspective that is mindful of the need, as you suggested, to embrace, points of view, experiences, and humanity that is too often pushed to the curb or exploited or, extracted or otherwise mishandled and misused, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we're looking for are new models of social and public investment that can really create true opportunities, that can really build shared prosperity, that can really harness the collective talents and visions and humanity of people that have been too often excluded from not just the margins, but from the mainline benefits of what you would call a democratic society and an inclusive economy. We want to really build something that's an authentically inclusive economy. And, a lot of it, has to do with the fact that we have evolved in our political culture and our notions of what economy is to a space and place that is really antithetical to the best of what this country was supposed to be about. I mean, I'm not saying it's been perfect. You and I know that history has been replete with, major transgressions, but more than most countries around the planet, and certainly most throughout history, there has been a certain opportunity space in the United States to enable people to self-actualize in ways that aren't really available in many other countries.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we have taken the best of that, and in recent years, because of a lot of reasons I can explain in a minute, we've kind of inverted the model, we've flipped it over. And we've created a situation where it's now become almost impossible, unless you have money and privilege, to really have any kind of what you would call a quality of life, because in the past, during the Depression years and some of the subsequent World War II years, there was a general impulse, a general notion to acknowledge that the purpose of government was really to be a place to even the playing field, to create, more equality, more justice, more investment in people who were not being beneficiaries of the system. And we had a lot of efforts in the 30s and the 60s to create social programs and social investment streams that really, I think history will show, really lifted a lot of people out of poverty and really created much more of the opportunity that this nation tries to claim in its kind of profile around the world. But there has been a kind of an underlying initiative on the part of people who have another point of view that has also informed our policy and our practice and turned it into a situation where really now government seems to be in service to exclusively people that are already privileged, that are
Yeah.
already
Yeah.
wealthy, that are already there at the table.
Yeah.
And there's very little room or impulse to kind of include people that really are in other parts of the equation, right? So what we have created, Jerry, is something that really tracks with just an excessive hyper materialism,
Yes.
what I would call a vanity economy, where we're producing goods and services that really have nothing to do with the impulses to create a democracy or equality, shared prosperity. It's all about creating goods and services that, are useful to an increasingly small group of people.
Yeah.
Fast cars that are, out of most people's range of purchase power, high tech, gadgets and equipment that I suppose there's some rush that people get out of that, but none of that is helping to solve, humanity's biggest problems. You see a lot of investment in pharmaceuticals and medical instrumentation, and supposedly all of these things help us to survive longer and with higher quality of life, but no one can afford healthcare, and mortality rates in many of our communities are as high as they've ever been.
Right.
So what's happening is that for people who have privilege at the upper levels, they can have all the toys, the gadgets, and the opportunities that they want. It's their playground. But that's a smaller and smaller portion of our society. When you really look at what's happened in the last, say, generation or two, what used to be the kind of basis of our democracy, this kind of robust middle class that gave people at least a hope of being able to move up the ladder, has essentially disappeared. We've disinvested from the middle class.
Yeah.
So now in the United States today, and like much of the case around the world, you either have it or you don't. There's very little in between. And that's why I think we're seeing so much challenge to our democracy and people that are outwardly now today giving up on democracy because it doesn't work for them anymore. Because they see new emerging groups, particularly like ours, who are hungry, who are hardworking, who have bought the Kool-Aid and are ready to do what we have to do to contribute. And the other folks who have traditionally been the beneficiaries are feeling threatened. And they're feeling as though if the rules don't work for them quite as much anymore, then they're going to blow it up and it's not going to work for anybody.
Right.
So I think our institute is dedicated to constructive, positive ways of acknowledging those realities and finding constructive alternatives to really understand how we can do better by reinvesting in people, by rethinking a lot of the assumptions that guide much of our policy, which is kind of rooted in a notion that if you're not successful in this country, there's something wrong with you.
Right.
It's a personal problem, right?
Yeah.
Rather than understanding these are systemic and structural problems. And we're really kind of in the discussion of how do we acknowledge those structural problems and then create policies and practices that turn it on its head, change the equation, and give people real hope, real opportunity, and a real pathway to shared prosperity.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned some very important things. And the word that you lift up is this word success. What is that? Because I think that through this, European Western kind of materialistic way, we look at success as economics. We look at it as comfort. We look at it as, a certain sense of power. But at what cost? And I think that what we have now realized is that sometimes the cost to get there is really very damaging to your health, to your own well-being, to our identity, to our sense of sacredness, to our sense of spirituality. And the question now becomes, is it worth it? Is that type of success worth it? And I think that what many of us have espoused for years, those of us that recognize the true message and values that our ancestors and our grandparents were trying to share with us, is that the sense of valuing all our relations and valuing even the whole sense of nature, of the earth, of the water, of the plants, of the beauty of things, of honoring relationships, which often when you get caught in this economic and political web, you almost are made to believe you need to give up those things or get out of those things or disconnect with those kind of folks in order to join another kind of folks that are the successful ones. And I think that what we're seeing now is people are waking up to realize, you know what, I'm not willing to give up my sense of sacredness, my sense of culture, my values, my sense of well-being, my health, and connectedness to those people at all different levels for a Western point of view that that determines success. That success for me, and I think about it, me as a grandfather, success for me is having sacred relationships with my grandchildren, for being in harmony and being in relationship and continuing to learn from even my children and those people that are much younger than me, but being able to be in relation with them and then support in the way we can. And I think that, what I've seen, not only in your work, but in your walk, is, you being able to lift up both sides of that. And I want to, before we close, I want to not forget and lift up your grandmother and her creativity. Because a major part of your life was working for Arte Público Press, in which I feel is a very significant part of your journey and of our journey, that of creativity and the whole aspect of writing and books and illustrations and sharing our story. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about the significance of that in reference to how you see us as a people and all people really having their voice and their stories represented.
Oh, I'm happy to talk about that. But first, let me just give you a big shout out for your analysis in response to my discussion about what we're trying to address at the Institute, because I couldn't agree with you more, Jerry. I think that there's so much that is attached to the notion of what is success that is wrongheaded and that has taken our people, our society, our world in a direction that is not sustainable.
Yeah.
And this is the reason why you see so much violence. This is the reason why you see so much mental destabilization, because at the root of it, even with the chatter and the talk about everyone trying to, be in this race for, the accumulation or whatever, people are deeply unhappy.
Yes.
They intuitively understand that there's something grossly awry with the path that we're on.
Yes.
And this is bringing out the kind of illness that we see throughout our society and all the aspects that you cover. So I just want to give you a shout out for really nailing that down in quite as articulate a way as you did. And then to the question about, the work of narrative and telling our story in first voice, authentic voice, our voice, and organizations like Arte Público Press at the University of Houston, which are among the very few Latino-owned and controlled, if you will, entities that really lift up our authors, our thinkers, our doers. I've been very fortunate to be affiliated with Nicolás Canelos and his very able team there for more than 25 years. I've published multiple volumes with them on not only the issues that we just talked about in my most recent book, Democracy in the Next American Economy, but also a series of books on the history of our civil rights and social justice struggles in the United States as Latina people. I've also written a trilogy of books with Frank de Jesus Acosta on the kind of work that really is embedded in your major contributions to the discourse, which is really looking at young Latino men and boys and the struggles that they have experienced in our education systems, in our criminal justice systems, in our economy, and have tried to give voice to, not only the analysis that kind of we require now to do a better job in honoring their many untapped talents, but also in giving them first voice opportunities around their arte, around their poetry, around their, their own perspective and visualization of a better world. And I think that this is something that's very important because, again, when we rely on other people to interpret and tell our stories, whether it's in books or in movies or popular culture, there's always the danger that it becomes perverted, that it becomes monetized, it becomes extractive. And we've seen that over and over again in so many venues, I don't even have to, describe it. You know what I'm talking about. But when we have control over how we tell our stories and the way that we tell our stories, that is actually power personified. That is actually us really looking in the mirror and reflecting that mirror to a larger society to project the image that we choose to project for the reasons that we have to project that. And more often than not, to your points that you just raised earlier, it's a different view of what success means. It's a different view of what humanity means. It's a different view of how to value and appreciate and embrace nature, how to understand creative culture, how to express in an affirmative, positive way what this thing called humanity is all about, right? And so I think it's some of the most vital work that we can be doing. And I feel very fortunate, very, very grateful that I've been given the opportunity to play a small role in that sphere of influence.
Right. Okay. And I really just want to acknowledge and lift up all of, what I call the Floricanto warriors, the are people that tell stories, that share arte, that are poets that are spitting rhymes and music and truths. Those that amazing artists that we have. I was just very fortunate to be at the MOCA there on a panel discussing the wall of balance and equity that Judy Baca has created. If you haven't seen it at the Geffen, you need to go see that. It's an amazing artwork and amazing spirit work that Judy and a whole number of other artists have done on murals and talking about, how we get to peace and healing. I was just on a panel yesterday discussing that. But I really do want to lift up, that sense of creativity that our community has and has really propelled us in our cars and our lowriders in our dress and our zoot suits and the way you see it in the young people today. They express themselves so vibrantly, and that's the spirit. And as you mentioned, you also see the spirit when it's wounded express itself as, profoundly. And, as a people, we have to listen. We have to pay attention to what's going on today. And the question is, what do we create?
Exactly.
Do we continue to create chaos and separation and inequity and harm? Or do we water the creativity that builds the sacredness and interconnectedness and blessings? And, and so with that in our conclusion, I want to just ask you, as someone that has walked this road for a long time, a long journey, I consider you an elder, at this point, what point of advice would you give that next generation, the people that are coming behind you, that to get them to that place where they can water, that aspect of the sacredness and the beauty and the joy but also be able to deal with the other part that is also part of our reality? What advice would you give folks?
Yeah, it's another great question among the many that you posed to me. Well, I think first and foremost, just riffing off what you shared with us a minute ago, I think it's important, vital, and essential that our young people don't feel like they have to invent it all on their own, because you have people like yourself. And in the arts and the culture space that you were just talking about, we have such a richness of people. You mentioned Judy Baca, just like a world class, muralist and thinker and creative person, and people like Patsy Valdez and Gronk and Sean Carrillo and Willie Aron and so many others that we can talk about in the iconography of our community. And Cheech Marin, to his great credit, has really captured a lot of that in his own collection that you can see now out at the museum in Riverside. So not be afraid to stand on the shoulders of the people that came before you and to emulate and build on what they laid down, because they started us in a really, really important direction. The other thing is, I think, to embrace and accept your authentic self and your voice. It's sometimes the effort of modern society is to beat that out of you, to kind of peer pressure you into being something that fits in with the crowd, or that, is hip and cool, or whatever it is in that moment. But those are passing aspects of life. You have to be with yourself the whole journey. You got to be there the whole way. You're in that, whether you can run, but you can't hide. Wherever you go, there you are, So if you're chasing around something that is an identity, or you're chasing around something that is a persona that is not natural to who you are, that is not authentic, you're putting yourself in harm's way. You're putting yourself in a space where your mind will get bent the wrong way. You're going to start looking for shortcuts to medicate. You're going to start going to alcohol or drugs or things like that are not going to help you really kind of get back in touch. They're going to take you further and further away. So keep close to who you really truly are. Listen to that inner voice in you. And I would say, lastly, don't go small, go big, man. You have one shot at this thing called La Vida, man. Do not allow your fears, your anxieties, your concerns about what others are going to say or think to get in the way of your greatness, because you are all that. Whoever you are, wherever you're coming from, man, you have gifts, you have voice, you have talents, you have riqueza that we badly need. And if you hold back, if you self-edit and you take yourself out of the game, that's one less measure of hope that we have in this world to survive these crazy times.
Wow.
Learn who you are. Stand on the shoulders of the people that came before you and bring it to the fullest, man. Don't be small, be big.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, that's a good one, man. Bring it and bring it big and bring all of yourself, and I'll, just put an exclamation point that you are enough. You're a sacred and a blessing just the way you are. And Henry Ramos, you're sacred and a blessing. And we thank you.
In your shadow, brother.
we thank you for who you are. Thank your parents, your ancestors, all those teachers along the way that have, guided you and blessed you up and healed you. And we thank you for everything that you've done to give voice to our community, and to that next generation. And I invite you all to, check out, Henry Ramos and the writings that he's done and, look them up. You can find them on Amazon and consult him. I mean, he's an elder in our community that really is able to articulate on both sides of that head and that heart. Reach out to him. He's one of the elders that is available. Don't wait. He has some messages and some teachings that many people need in order for us to go big, for us to be authentic that way. And, so Henry, thank you so much for all that you do. And I look forward to continue doing work with you and bringing it big. We're going to bring it big and we're going to keep going, as long as we can, as long as we can remember. And when we can't remember, we'll keep telling the same story over and over again and and laugh about it together, man.
No, Jerry, man, it's just a pleasure and an honor always to be in your company. And you inspire me and so many others. I'm so grateful for you and the work that you do. Thank you, thank you, thank you for including me in your conversations. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I as we close today, reflecting on so many teachings, but I just want to just reiterate, what my brother just said is that, you are enough. Just the way you sit there right now, all of us come with our blessings and our baggage, and that's okay. As long as we continue to do our work, continue to, use the teachings that our ancestors have laid down before us and recognize that you have a whole village out there of people that are waiting, just waiting, to greet you, to embrace you. But maybe you have to go seek them. But we're here. We're here for you. The spirits are here. The elders are here. And for our young people, bring it big. Bring it big. We need your voice. We need your energy. But we're here together with you, So with that, I want to thank you all for listening today and really, appreciate you taking the time. Tag us, leave us a message, reach out and share this podcast with others as we go forward, to bring the medicine of these ancestors and all our relations in a good way so that we can heal the world, so that we can heal our communities, heal our families, and heal ourselves in order that the big that we bring is a little bit better every day and every generation. Thank you very much. Clase Comadli, Él es Dios.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.